Ladies and gentlemen, queridos amigos, it is my pleasure to welcome you to Instituto Cervantes London for another installment of the Blanco-White series, which, as some of you know, deals with British-Spanish relations. I am delighted to see old friends as well as new faces among the audience. In either case, thanks very much for coming. It was months ago that I got an email from Martin Lutyens, who is with us here today, on behalf of the Lutyens Trust. I'm very happy to collaborate with them for the first time. Martin asked me if we were interested in hosting a lecture on Lutyens and Spain. I of course jumped at the opportunity. From Íñigo to the Adam brothers, and from Sir Christopher Wren to Sir Geoffrey Jellicoe, there is an extraordinary list of noteworthy British architects, town planners, and architect design and garden and landscape designers. But I must confess, I have always felt a certain weakness for Sir Edwin Lutyens, maybe for embodying a certain sophisticated but practical Britishness, or maybe for his perfect combination of the old and the new. However, the mere idea that Lutyens could have had a project in Spain had never crossed my mind, and I'm grateful to Martin for letting me know about it, and of course to my fellow countryman Íñigo Barrasate for his research on a topic which has remained obscure until he has come to shed light about it. Although the work of Edwin Lutyens has received careful scholarly study since the 1980s, his projects in Spain remained indeed very little known until now. Unfortunately, Lutyens was unable to complete his Spanish commissions, mostly because of the deterioration of the country's economy and social order in the 1930s, and this has played a major role in keeping these projects in the dark. Furthermore, the devastation caused by the Civil War obliterated most of the evidence once held in Spanish archives. So in a way, the story of Lutyens' engagements with the country is a sad fable of 1930s Spain, and it is also sad that we cannot boast of having some remarkable buildings by this most important architect. The story, however, is a beautiful one to be told, and deserves our attention for signaling what is also a beautiful moment in British-Spanish artistic encounters, as beautiful in fact as the projects Lutyens had designed but never saw the light of day. That's all from me now, ladies and gentlemen. I hope you have an inspiring evening, and please do join us for a glass of Spanish wine after the talk. Íñigo will deal with some Q&A at the end of his talk, so in case you have something to ask him. Thank you very much. Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much, Ignacio. Well, this talk is a summary of my PhD research, which I did at the University of Edinburgh in the last 3 years, and in which I tried to advance the knowledge on Lutyens' buildings in Spain and more generally his work. It is true that some things have been written before my research. The most important article was one by the late Gavin Stamp and Margaret Richardson, but it was very short, and although it was very inspiring and it had very interesting information, it was kind of intriguing to me because there were so many unanswered questions. So I decided to embark in this project of starting a PhD on the work of this excellent architect in Spain, and this, which I'm going to present to you, is a kind of a summary of it all. I am an architect by training, so I'm going to try and balance the architectural part of the explanation, also with some anecdotes of his travels to Spain. There are many written letters between himself and his wife, Lady Emily, and I'll be reading most of it because I'm going to be reading parts of his letters, and also because I wouldn't like to divert too much from the main topic. Can you hear me correctly? Yes. Okay. Well, the first question that one can ask himself is why why Spain? Why an architect in the early 20th century in Britain should suddenly find so many things, so many clients in Spain, and mostly Lutyens, who was an architect who until that moment was absolutely unconnected to Spain. That was the first intriguing question. And the truth is that Spain, the Spain to which Lutyens traveled in the 1910s and 1920s, was a rapidly changing country. Its economy had been growing steadily during the last decades, and British railway and mining companies were present in the country since the 19th century. At the same time, in that period, everything British became fashionable amongst Spanish elites. We even had an English queen from 1906. You know, Alfonso XIII married an English woman who was a niece of Queen Victoria. She was Anna of Battenberg. So Spanish industrialists and noblemen were eager to have English-style houses built for them and had the money to pay for them. Lutyens was not the first British architect to build in Spain. This picture here is not of an English house. This house is in Spain, but it was designed by an English architect. An English architect who also designed a royal palace in San Sebastian for Alfonso XIII's mother. The Albas, where is the sorry. Yes, thank you. The Albas, who were to become Lutyens' main clients in Spain, belonged to one of the country's principal noble families. They were descendants of King James I of England and were enthusiastic Anglophiles. At that time, the family was formed by three brothers. The eldest one, Jacobo, was the 17th Duke of Alba. Hernando, who you can see here in this photograph, was the 18th Duke of Peñaranda, and Sol was the Duchess of Santoña, the three of whom became clients of Lutyens. The two boys had been educated in England at Beaumont College, a Jesuit school in Berkshire, and were very fluent in English. Hernando Peñaranda, or Nando as he was commonly known, met Lutyens at a party in Lord Wimborne's house at Bishop Ledgers. They usually traveled to England and they had many friends here, so Lord Wimborne was a very close friend with Nando Peñaranda, and Wimborne had been a client of Lutyens. He was in fact a client of Lutyens for many years. So this man introduced Peñaranda and Lutyens, and that's where the relationship started. He met Lutyens at a party in Lord Wimborne's house in September 1915, where apparently he expressed his interest in building a palace on his estate in southwest Spain. On the same day, or very shortly afterwards, he invited Lutyens to visit the site. The adverse consequences of the Great War on Lutyens' practice could well explain his eagerness to try his fortune in Spain, and just a month later, he arrived at Spain. Lutyens was a very successful architect at the time. He was designing the new Indian capital, the imperial capital in Delhi, and he also had many commissions in Britain. But suddenly, with the start of the outbreak of the Great War, all these works were stopped. They came to a halt, so he had to try to gain new commissions in other places. So this encounter was quite providential in some ways, because he had the chance to start contacting new clients. Lutyens' first visit to Spain, reached by train via Paris, is detailed in letters written to his wife during his stay. Arriving on Saturday 23 October at the Liria Palace, the Alba's residence in Madrid, Lutyens was accommodated, as he said, in some very comfortable rooms, and it seems that he liked Peñaranda from the first moment, as he describes him as a charming person, 33, very funny, simple, in the nice way, full of fun and life. These are drawings he did. As a guest of the Albas, Lutyens was a privileged tourist in Spain. He was toured to monuments and historic sites, was hosted in palaces, and was introduced to statesmen and intellectuals, and even to the king. He was taken to the bullfights and on sightseeing tours around Madrid and neighboring towns. The latter enabled him to study Spanish traditional architecture at first hand. On this trip, Lutyens visited El Escorial, the great 16th century royal palace, which made a great impression on him. He found that it lacked invention, but the ornament and the proportions were good. It's a great palace, all very simple and no fraudulent construction. In Guadalajara, Lutyens and his hosts visited an old palace with some good rooms, most likely the Palacio del Infantado. He also had time to visit the royal palace at Aranjuez and the Renaissance town of Alcalá de Henares. From his letters, we can understand that the elements of Spanish architecture that he liked most were iron grills, ornaments, and patios. On the 27th of October, Lutyens set off for El Guadalperal. On their way to El Guadalperal, they visited Toledo, where Lutyens had a chance to see the Renaissance hospital of Tavera. He wrote about it, a very good hospital with a double court or patio with a central way leading to a great church. And he drew this little plan in the letter to his wife. As we shall see, the hospital would offer some inspiration for his subsequent El Guadalperal project. After Toledo, they stayed the night at the nearby estate of La Ventosilla, owned by Peñaranda's sister, the Duchess of Santoña. On his arrival to La Ventosilla, he wrote to his wife, "We arrived at Ventosilla. We were met in a courtyard by a crowd of dogs, dukes, duchesses, children, and a delightful Irish nanny, an old house added to by their own labor, direct enough and shamelessly shoddy, roomy, comfortable, and as English as they can make it. Sumptuous tea and nanny presided. We had time before dark to go round near about the place. Santoña and his duchess, Alba's sister, are keen of a country life. There they are independent of everything and everybody. They have their own farm, bakery, they breed mules, pigs, preserve their game, make their own electric light and power for the farm machinery. It is a lambe in a sea of Spain. There was a delightful priest, father confessor and estate agent, loving the hunt and the shoot, spends his day in breeches and gaiters, and for dinner he appears in his cassock with its 42 buttons, motors in plenty, and a delightful battery of servants, all friendly and friends of the family, each one a host in himself. Furious wood fires. There are nurseries with toy room complete, and such toys, and each little boy had a recess by his bed as an altar or chapel, where saints and martyrs and the Mother Mary stood in the full panoply of Rome. After dinner, he showed his works to his hosts with the help of some transparencies and pictures. The fact that he was carrying transparencies and pictures with him is also a sign that he was indeed looking actively for new clients. He described the Duke of Santoña as a quite genial creature, suffering from gout, and living for sport and his farming, and the Duchess as very small, always in breeches and gaiters, more like a boy to look at than a woman, has no nerves and rides astride, though in the afternoon she appeared gowned like a Byzantine queen, in pelts, baroque jewels, some very good pearls, and a net of gems for headgear." This is the little drawing she did of the Duchess. very small. You can read here. The next day, they drove west to El Guadalperal through the arid country, dotted with scattered ilex forests, which Lutyens compared to an Old Testament picture in an arid country much like Delhi. Finally, they arrived at El Gordo. The party was accommodated in some small and ill-equipped houses the Duke owned. Lutyens complained of the poor conditions in a letter to Lady Emily. There are no sanitary arrangements, no fireplaces, and flies abounding. After their arrival, they soon started to work, inspecting the vast estate and looking for a suitable location for the building that Peñaranda wanted to build. The following day opened with promise. Next morning, Wednesday, was brilliant, and the whole panorama lay bare to us. The forest of old ilex, the Tagus at our feet. To the south, a range of mountains beyond a plain, and to the north, snow-capped giants that seem to belong more to heaven than to earth. And before long, the party continued the inspection. The priest rode about searching for brick, earth, lime, and sand, and returned gloriously happy and successful. Good sand, good clay, brick, earth, and plenty of stuff to burn good lime. There are Roman ruins nearby, and on the part of the state near the river, and on which I think we will decide, are giant heaps of stones, evidently collected by some ancient for a building, never started. Perhaps a Moorish fort reconquest, or a Roman one before that. No tool marks on the granite to make evidence. By then, Lutyens had identified a suitable site and explained his first ideas to a surveyor who had traveled from Madrid. I showed him where and what I wanted to do, levels, etc. On the riverside, a cliff over the river, a curtailed view of snow mountains, a lower sheltered site where the trees grow big and the river runs, and you will get views beneath the spreading branches and not above, as in an airplane. After 2 days' work, Lutyens and his host left for Madrid on Saturday morning. Monday was All Saints' Day, so did little but work a good deal on El Gordo house. Alba showed me his archives, etc. Christopher Columbus letters, wonderful. Letters from Elizabeth, Henry VIII of England, the wills of the Catholic kings, lots of letters from Christopher Columbus. The first visit to Spain was a success, both personally and professionally. Lutyens started working on the Guadalperal project, had a chance to visit part of the country and to meet important people. His position as a prestigious English architect and a guest of the Albas also gave him the opportunity to gain new commissions. Jacobo de Alba himself appeared to be a potential client and asked Lutyens about a possible addition to the Liria Palace. He writes, Alba has a good deal of land around the Palacio de Liria, and he wants to reconstruct a lot of it and build a place for his archives. He says he will ask me about it when I am back. On Monday night, he left Madrid for Gibraltar, where he would take a boat to Marseille and then to India. These are some images of the local press, ABC, and a magazine of shooting parties in La Ventosilla, which was a very renowned shooting spot. Lutyens' letters to Lady Emily during his second visit to Madrid in November 1916 provide further information about the commission. Apparently, the visit involved very intense work. Santoña, Peñaranda's brother-in-law, wanted Lutyens to start building immediately a new large country house on his estate of La Ventosilla, while Peñaranda wanted him to work on El Guadalperal. In La Ventosilla, as he writes, he worked like a slave, making foundation plans, etc., so that they could get on without waiting for the finished drawings. On their way from La Ventosilla to El Guadalperal, Peñaranda's car, in which Lutyens was traveling, met Santonia's carriage, heading to La Ventosilla. The road was on a high embankment, and the mules were scared and ran out of the road. The chauffeur got distracted and drove to the other side of the road. Lutyens made this little drawing here of how the car in which he was being drove stayed by the road and almost died. And he wrote, "It was an awful squeak. The car was like this. It just balanced. The chauffeur got out in a jiffy. Peñaranda was in the upper side, I in the lower, and had great difficulty to get out. And I was warned to be very careful. I got out all right, but if the car had gone down, I would have been crushed, killed outright." Apart from working in La Ventosilla and El Guadalperal for several days, on the evening of Wednesday, Lutyens joined a partridge suit organized by Santonia at La Ventosilla, which King Alfonso also joined. Lutyens therefore had an opportunity to meet the king, and as usual, he did not miss the chance to seek an important client. He writes, "I sat with the king in his bed and walked, talked with the king, with the queen, had very good innings. We talked building, and I told His Majesty many things he should do, such as Napoleon did, etc. The king has asked me to the palace tomorrow, and is going to take me over it himself, which will be fun." The day after, Sunday, they visited the royal palace in Madrid. The king, he writes, took us, Peñaranda, myself, all on the place. State rooms, private rooms where we met the queen, lying on a sofa, cellars, vaults, kitchens, where we, like schoolboys, stole food and were given cocktails. Lutyens was amazed by the size of the palace and the riches it contained. Some beautiful tapestries. He had 1,400 of them. The carpets throughout the palace were Spanish, rather crude. A beautiful Tiepolo ceiling in the throne room. Some very beautiful Goyas, but his grandfather gave all the Velázquez to the nation. He summarized his second trip. "My visit has been a great success. I have get out 2 houses, enter a great deal, but I knew a king, and I like the feeling of it. Duchess Antonia told me Alba is looking for a country place where he might build a palace in which he can end his days, and that I should build it. I have had talks with Alba, but he said nothing himself. They are also talking of doing alterations to the Liria Palace, but his Spanish architect is not inclined to start the archive buildings, which I should do just yet, but 2 big houses are quite enough at a time." It is indeed very probable, as he says, that Lutyens did alterations to the Liria Palace in the late 1910s. The Duke rebuilt the gardens in 1916, so he was engaged in refurbishing and building activity. The interior of the palace was mostly refurbished in the 19th century with ornate late Rococo paneling, including the entrance hall, but the existing photographs of the 1920s show a restrained classical language which is fully consistent with Lutyens' work. As you can see here in these pillars, this carved decoration, also the door cases, and these geometric patterns in the floor. Lutyens traveled to Spain some 14 months later, in December 1917, this time not en route to India, but exclusively in order to supervise his ongoing Spanish projects. I would like to stop at this little sketch drawn in a notebook, probably during his first trip to Spain, which contains the basic elements of what would be his final 1917 design for the Palace of El Guadalperal. The layout of the house around a large patio with arcaded galleries, the entrance at the center of a very flat facade. Here, the entrance would be here. and opposite to it some large rooms connected to an open loggia. This would be the south, this would be the north, and this here is very similar to that little sketch I showed you of the hospital in Toledo. These apse to the right would indicate the position of the chapel. This scheme was enlarged in subsequent drawings and developed into detailed, large-scale plans of the building. These watercolors of William Walcott have disappeared, but they were published in the Builder. The facade is on the northern side, and the main entrance is an imposing, richly carved double-height portal, which leads through a small entrance hall to a patio surrounded by arcaded galleries on 2 levels. A huge library. The library would be in this side here. This side over here, that would be the library. A huge library occupies the whole area west of the patio, while to the east a corridor links a row of service rooms. The south gallery of the patio, which is this one here, leads to the main public rooms opening onto a large terrace overlooking the Tagus. This would be the terrace, the loggia, overlooking the Tagus, that would be here. From there, a grand double staircase descends to the riverside. Lutyens also defined in that way this design in an interview he gave to an architectural journal. He said about it, "I used granite and stone for the dresswork, and the roof covered with Spanish tiles, and the exterior walls being plastered in the typical Spanish manner. The floors will be formed by brick barrels and vaults, except the reception rooms, which will be constructed in timber, exposed on the underside. The site is in high ground, with a commanding view, the difference of level between the patio and the terrace being 27 feet, with steps leading down to a landing stage on the bank of the Tagus." This would be the landing stage. And this will be the upper floor, with the upper part of the chapel here and the main rooms here, with a balcony also looking south to the river. As Lutyens pointed out, the house was going to be Spanish looking in its materials, but also in its layout, arranged around an arcaded patio, and also in its architectural ornaments. In the elevations you can see how the ornamentation is almost reduced to the iron grills and to the portal, which, as you can see here, was copied almost directly from a Spanish Renaissance palace. So the main entrance here, if you see it here in bigger, and you compare it with this Renaissance Palace portal, which is in Peñaranda de Duero, you can see that he copied almost all the elements. You have here the three blasons. The center one is also bent in the typical Castilian manner. You have here the bust. You have here the little angels and like the garlands. So this would be a 3D rendering of the project, and you can see how he plays with these differences in levels to create this kind of scenographic setting. This is the Palace of La Ventosilla, which he did for the Duchess of Santoña. At the same time as he was working on the design for El Guadalperal, Lutyens received a commission from Peñaranda's sister. Her husband, the Duke of Santoña, was the only son of a very rich industrialist, and he had inherited a very big fortune, which was unfortunately, since the 1910s, gradually diminishing. Doña Sol was the second wife of Santonia, and as Santonia had already children with his first wife who were living in the old house, she wanted to have a house for herself and for her new family. So she bought an adjoining plot of land to the estate of her husband, and asked Lutyens, probably during his first trip to Spain, to start preparing the plans for a large house. The plan layout, which you can see here, these are some beautiful drawings, architectural drawings that are kept here in the RIBA, and they are watercolored. You can see that the plan organizes efficiently a complex building through this cross-shaped plan, in which he intersects these 4 different wings, creating this patio here. So, summarizing this a little bit, this will be the north. These 2 huge entrance doors, which you could see here, would be the carriage passages, so people who would enter here with their cars or carriages. This would be the chapel here in the center, and some service rooms around. This wing would have the kitchen and also some other service spaces. This would be a loggia that would lead you to the main public rooms of the house, like a very huge hall here, and the drawing room and the dining room. And this would be the guest wing, where you have 8 bedrooms for the guests. As you saw in one of the previous slides, this was a very renowned shooting spot. So Santonia used to organize these hunting parties and invite many friends over, invited the king. So he thought that he needed like a comfortable place to accommodate them. This would be the first floor, where you have the main bedrooms, the Duke and the Duchess, and the children here, and the nurseries. The architectural language that Lutyens used for La Ventosilla is, as in the case of El Guadalperal, Spanish-looking, but more austere and unadorned. He used square pillars with no orders instead of columns in the lodges and colonnades, and the only exterior ornamentation is provided by the carved coats of arms of Doña Sol. In his 1916 trip to Spain, Lutyens wrote, "Monday I spent pegging at the Santonia house at the low hills overlooking the Tagus near here. A very warm, perfect day. In the evening I made foundation plans, so they could get on without waiting for the finished drawings. I worked like a slave. Tuesday ditto." In fact, the site was leveled and gravel and sand were transported from the riverbank. But, however, soon after this started, the Duke went bankrupt. So his wife had to, in some ways, rescue him financially. So he sold some of his properties, and Doña Sol bought La Ventosilla. So finally, they decided that they didn't need any new palace, and they could get on living in the old one. In February 1919, Lutyens traveled again to Madrid, not en route to India, but as in 1917, specifically to supervise his Spanish projects. Strangely enough, Lutyens didn't travel to El Guadalperal, where some works had started. Maybe because of weather conditions, or maybe because he was too busy seeking other clients. Indeed, Lutyens' worker in El Guadalperal, Hinton, traveled to Madrid to meet him. However, out of his 1 week long stay in Spain, he found time to travel north to Santander for 3 days. The reason for this is that in Madrid he had met the Count de la Cimera, who wanted Lutyens to design a house for him. As on previous visits to Madrid, Lutyens was hosted in the Alba's residence, the Lilia Palace, from where he wrote one letter to Lady Emily on February 9. He said, "Today I go to Santander, where the Count de Cimera wants to build. I get back here to Madrid on Wednesday and start that night for Paris." Immediately he added, "Cimera is going to build a quite good house in Madrid, and it will be great, for he is a very rich man and spends much in clothes." Lutyens ended his brief account with a description of his potential client. "He has wardrobe clothes," he writes, "1,000 shoes, 1,000 boots, 1,000 trousers, etc., etc. And there is in the top of each case of clothes his photograph dressed for polo, for court, as a soldier, as a gentleman, tennis kit, golf kit, racing kit, cards, yet withal a pleasant, quiet man capped with grey hair." The project of the house for the Count de Cimera in Madrid is exceptional in Lutyens' production, as during his long career as an architect he had many domestic commissions, but most of them had been country houses or suburban houses. An exception is a house he did in Westminster, and this one which he never built. Lutyens designed the house in his notebook during his stay in Spain. In the sketches he drew, we can see the strategy to respond to the urban and noisy environment that would have surrounded this house in the center of Madrid, and to allow it an atmosphere of privacy. Like in Italian Renaissance palaces, the house was to be raised over a high, rusticated platform, as you can see here. The main rooms would be placed in the first floor, and the bedrooms in the second floor. To the north of the house he placed the stables and servant garages. And to the south he used a soil field in order to build an elevated garden, accessed from the first floor through classical lodges. These were his drawings. This would be the first floor, where you can see that elevated garden here, surrounded by these two lodges. These would be the main salons, the library, a patio here, and upstairs there would be the bedrooms. And here in this section you can see how this garden is elevated to allow some views to the salon that would be here. Lutyens, he made some different versions on how to compose the main facade. He tried different types of porticos, some of them pedimented, as you can see here in these sketches, or in this sketch here, but he finally decided to place this Syrian window with these festoons and a carved coat of arms here. In this rendering you can see that idea and the Italian flavor of this design, with this rusticated platform here and the main rooms up there, in some way protected from the noise. Also in this view you can get the same idea from a different point of view. This would be the garden with the lodges. And this would be the garden that he designed. This drawing I found it also in the Victoria and Albert Museum, and it fitted perfectly with the plans of the building. So this is the kind of Versailles Baroque garden that he designed for the Count de Cimera. Meanwhile, in El Guadalperal, some works were already going on. In 1918, Lutyens had instructed his clerk of works, Hinton, to proceed with some preliminary works. A 10-mile road was built from Navalmoral station to the center of the property. An English-made water pipes were also laid, while work on the first ancillary buildings was started in 1918. The water supply tank was built in the highest part of the estate, on the top of the hill. This was the water tank, which still exists. As the construction of the palace was expected to be a long business, a small house close to the water tank was adapted and expanded for the Duke's use in the meantime. These years also brought important changes to Nando's personal life. In September 1920, he was engaged to marry the daughter of the Marquis of Viana, one of the king's closest friends. The wedding took place in December 1920 and drew Nando even closer to the king. The king became a regular visitor to the hunting parties of El Guadalperal. By 1920, Peñaranda was seeking a more settled life. He was now a middle-aged man, married and awaiting a child. He therefore started spending longer periods in El Guadalperal, where he could devote himself to hunting and where he became increasingly involved in the state management, introducing innovative farming improvements. With the growing importance of El Guadalperal in Peñaranda's life, some temporary structures were quickly erected to accommodate him and his guests on their frequent visits. Soon after their marriage, Peñaranda and his wife moved there for the winter. And it was here in El Guadalperal where Peñaranda's only son was born. His son was Timo Peñaranda, who was born in 1922. These simple white plaster buildings with red tiles still survive today, and they are still used as the main state residence. They were built on the top of the hill immediately south of the water tank. This is a photograph here of the King Alfonso XIII with Timo Peñaranda, with Peñaranda's son, near one of these temporary houses. At the same time, a village or poblado was erected next to the temporary houses in order to accommodate the farm buildings and around 50 families of workers, some of whom continued living there until the 1980s. Furthermore, the poblado included other community buildings such as a chapel, a tavern and a school that Timo Peñaranda attended together with the laborers' children. These buildings are arranged around a series of patios crossed by a long symmetry axis. The most remarkable building is the dovecote, which you can see here, and which stands at the center of the main courtyard. In each of its four sides, the roof eaves are interrupted at the center by a small wooden balcony covered by a pitch roof, which frames the entrance window of the doves. So he planned it this way so that the doves could get in and out through that little hole. Let us visits to El Guadalperal in 1925 and 1926 indicate a new wave of activity. In 1925 he stayed at El Guadalperal, and according to what he wrote to Lady Emily, in El Guadalperal he worked all day on the various works. He finally left Spain, and just after he left, excavations for the palace foundations began. According to Hinton, some archaeological finds soon emerged. The giant heaps of stones that Lutyens had observed in his first visit to El Guadalperal were not Roman or Moorish, as he had thought in 1915, but the top of a large underground prehistoric structure, a dolmen. A wall was constructed around these remains and investigations were carried out. The discovery forced Lutyens to select a new building site. The palace was moved to the top of the hill, a location that had already been considered back in 1915. This involved him in redesigning the whole project, as his earlier design was heavily dependent on the hilly topography over the river. Lutyens produced plans for the new project between 1916 and 1928 And the new design also reflects the new necessities of Peñaranda, who now required a much larger house. I'm going to summarize a little bit the architectural explanation of this. The entrance would be through this north forecourt, and it would have, if you know the Viceroy's house in Delhi, it has a very similar shape. So you have a central volume here, which in Delhi would be the Durbar Hall, the Great Hall, and here it is this patio in which you have this same element which he had seen in Toledo, and he tried then to use in other of his projects, and finally he used it. So there is this central volume, and then there are these four wings stemming out. This wing here would be the chapel, and this symmetrical wing here would be the kitchen and scullery and kind of storerooms. Here you would have the dining room. Here you have the main salons facing this loggia to the south. So there would be here some views also of the river. And here there would be two pavilions, identical pavilions. One was called the King's Wing and the other one the Duke's Wing. You can see the same here in these renderings. This is the north entrance with this kind of Mannerist portal, and this would be the chapel, and this is the kitchen. It's a very odd shape for a kitchen, but he wanted symmetry, so this is one of his drawings for that central motif of the facade, which he also drew here in this beautiful watercolor. This is the dining room front, and this is a view from the south. So you get here the Duke's wing, here the King's wing, and here you have the main salons. And you have this platform built for the garden view. According to Hinton, work on El Guadalperal Palace finally began in 1930. Early activities involved the quarrying of granite and the excavation of the foundations, the result of which can still be seen as a large levelled platform some 400 meters west of the house that was realized. Nothing more was ever built. In the midst of the social tensions, the king left Spain in 1931, never to return again. The anachronistic land-owning structure in southern Spain was another cause of social tension, as it perpetuated huge inequality between the poor peasantry and rich landowners. In 1931, the radical trade unions grew in importance, especially in the areas of southern Spain characterized by the presence of large states, such as El Guadalperal. Hinton decided to pack his belongings and departed for London in 1932. In 1934, Lutyens went back to Spain for the last time, not to supervise his work, but to give a talk to the architects and university students invited by the Duke of Alba. After almost 10 years, he was glad to find Alba very much himself, hating the Republic, and Nando as thin as ever, but a little bit older. Peñaranda's personal life was at the moment going through difficulties, with the expropriation of many of his properties. As Lutyens wrote, he has had 21 estates taken from him. He keeps El Guadalperal going, but never goes himself, as he would have been shot. Lutyens' Spain of palaces and aristocrats was quickly fading away. Peñaranda didn't live in Liria Palace anymore. He had bought an apartment in the top floor of a new building and invited Lutyens for dinner. The old friends dined on the terrace overlooking Madrid. Peñaranda had masses of flowers in his terrace brought from Guadalperal. and that evening would be the last time that Lutyens saw Peñaranda. War finally broke in 1936 after a military uprising led by General Franco, and Nando, who lived in Republican-controlled Madrid, didn't flee the capital because he wasn't involved in politics and he thought he was not in danger of being imprisoned. But that was not the case. He was indeed imprisoned. He was taken to the Cárcel Modelo of Madrid and he was assassinated in the mass killings of Paracuellos del Jarama. So Lutyens lost his client and his friend in those circumstances. But ironically, the devastating civil war brought a new commission to Lutyens because Liria Palace, where Lutyens used to stay when he traveled to Madrid, was struck by a German air raid, and it burned. It burned down to the foundations, as you can see here. This was the state of the palace after the war. So, do we still have any? Okay. Okay. Just to finish with this. So by then, after the war, Alba was sent by Franco to London as the Spanish ambassador. So Alba continued his friendship with Lutyens there in London, and he asked him to prepare the drawings for the reconstruction of his palace, which Lutyens did very happily, because then it was the beginning of the Second World War, and again he didn't have much to do in London. So he prepared the drawings for the reconstruction of the palace. This is one of them, and you can see another one here. Beautiful drawings with the entrance hall here, the staircase, and the chapel here, and some other rooms to the sides. But this central part of the palace is where he focused his design effort. When he sent the last drawings to Spain in 1943, just a few months later, Lutyens died, and the reconstruction of the palace didn't start until 1946. And it was done partly following Lutyens' design, but by a Madridian architect who followed his basic layout, but changed some of the detail. So this is a summary of all his projects, of his, in some ways, unhappy projects, because almost nothing of what he designed was finally realized. But I think it's a very exciting story, and I'm happy to have told it to you.
Comments that you'd like to make, just make yourself known to me so I can hand you over this microphone.
Thank you very much for your lecture today. It was very interesting to hear Lutyens' adventures trying to get something done in Spain. I wonder whether you know whether he had any influence in other Spanish architects at the time, or whether he had any correspondence with any of them, and his view on the architecture that was happening in Spain at the time.
Well, this is off.
It's on. Just
Okay. Well, in some of his letters in the 1934 visit to Spain, when he addressed the Institute of Madridian Architects, he met some of them. For example, he met Fernando Chueca-Goitia, who was introduced to Lutyens by the Duke of Alba, but I don't know if they had any correspondence afterwards. I don't think so. But there was a Madridian architect, Blanco Soler, who worked in Lutyens' office in London for like a year and a half. And when he traveled to Madrid in 1934, they showed him the new buildings. They were building the university by then, the Ciudad Universitaria, and he didn't like it at all. He said it was this kind of modernistic architecture he really disliked. So no, he didn't like it. Any other questions? Okay, well, thank you very much.
Thank you. Hold up.
Thank you very much, everyone. Just to bring your attention to our wine reception and snacks outside, so feel free to have some talks in here with yourselves and of course with our beautiful speaker, and go outside and have a couple of drinks. Alright, thank you.
I actually just dug out a few of the old pictures that we had from Hinton, yeah. So I mean, all the old pictures in there. They're very old pictures to see. This is probably one of them. Yeah, that's right, yeah. This is